Here's the question. How do you make the impossible possible? Simple. Remove the I am, the ego. Now, how do you step into that newfound possibility? With a series of small intentional steps. Never forget, the greatest among us started from humble beginnings. But to truly unlock your potential, realize you're here for something greater. If you're yearning for more than just a good life, let's take that small step together to reach greatness. Welcome to the Greatness from Small Beginnings podcast, where we're talking to those who have gone from mediocrity to motivated, overlooked to overachieving, forgettable to unforgettable. Are you ready? Let's go. Well, hello, everybody. This is Keith Callaway Sr., and this is Greatness from Small Beginnings. I'm back again, and I appreciate it. I know this podcast comes out every Monday, and I love dropping it on Mondays because it seems like by Monday sometime we need some good word. Not that every Monday's bad. Sometimes it's after a restful weekend, and we're ready to get back to it. But here's what I plan on talking about today in regards to how we be great, how we go be the great we're supposed to be, and how sometimes we're in a small place. We are small now, and we're moving to something bigger and better, and that God made us to do exactly that. So I heard a podcast by Christy Wright this last week. I think the podcast was titled, and I know the email that I got it in was called On the Edge of Breakthrough. And I listened to the podcast and I thought, man, I really resonate with what's being said here. That often I feel like, well, I think I've mentioned on this podcast that 2024 was a hard year. And yet I look out into 2025 and some of it's a little ways out, maybe near the end of the year or mid-year or something, some things that if things go a certain way, and it's not always the easy way to see or the easy way, that if things go a certain way, that this could be a really good year in many ways. It could bring a lot of clarity on my company, my household, the family, what we do for a longer term future, these kinds of things. I'm going to work on some aspects of some finance things this year for more of a legacy play. And again, it's not a lot of dollars. Let me tell you, it's not a lot of dollars, but it will one day matter. Like the accumulation of it will matter. And if I live another 20 or 30 years, not only will I see probably my great grandkids, but I will maybe even be able to create what in some worlds would be called wealth. At this point, I look at it and I say, I have a retirement account, but I didn't start putting into it until a few years ago, and that means there's almost nothing in it. So, so I look at what we are doing and I say, okay, it is still a long play, and I want to make some headway. That means I need to be intentional. So that's some of the things that will be clarified this year as I look the explanation in the email from Christy Wright, and then listen to the podcast. She talks about the story in Joshua 11 where Joshua and the children of Israel were on the verge of going into the land of promise, the promise that had been made some 40 years earlier. And now it's time. Well, what happened is that the local, not just the army of the part of the land that they were going to enter, but multiple areas, they joined up into an army that was bigger, much, much bigger and much, much stronger. And they fortified every position and basically made it look impossible. Well, thankfully, in that story, Joshua, the one that was leading, he had the kind of faith that said, no, it's been promised. We need to go take the promise. We need to go step into the promise. And that's what he did. And of course, the story ended well, but not without the fear of it not going well, not without the consideration that, man, this is hard, or there's something huge standing in our way. And so kind of the way of thinking about this has to do with delayed gratification, but not just delayed gratification as if I'll just wait and be passive. That sometimes when you're on the edge of doing something amazing or something amazing is going to happen in your life, often more resistance will come your way. And sometimes we need to be aware enough to say that resistance means I'm closer than I thought. That resistance means that I'm on the cusp of something fairly amazing. Now, it may not be the end, but the next step might be mine if I keep persisting. The word that came up this last week in a meeting, and then I heard another definition of it this morning, is called resilient. The person this morning, it was on an Instagram reel, which I rarely do in the morning. I just happened to scroll past it and went, resilient. Wait, that's a word that I was mattered to me this week. Let me see what this person has to say. And it was a professor talking about how resilience is like the definition of the gap between what you know or what's unknown and then what you know being another spot, and it's that whole thing in between where there's a long time of a need for patience, of frustration almost. Well, he didn't say almost. She didn't say almost. She said frustration. It could be a long period of frustration that is you want to be gratified for where you're headed, but the frustration is in the way. And you're in the unknown and you want to go to what's known. And in between the two, and what's known is your vision. Like, I want to go there. And that's a little bit of a misnomer, because do we actually know what's out in the future? No, we don't, but we have a vision for it. And so we want to go to what's known because honestly, it's easier to be in a spot that's known. We can, at least for some sense, at least mentally emotionally control what's going on in our minds, because then we know stuff about it. Anyway, I'm talking in circles a little bit, but we can't get sucked into that. So found a story also about delayed gratification, and what a great place to find a story. It's actually in a children's book, a monthly magazine for kids. And I open it up because I look for something to read to my grandkids. Most of them are younger, so they probably wouldn't get the concept of this. But I think I'll tell the story trying to remember what was going on in it, because I don't need to read every single thing. But so here's a grandson talking to his grandfather, and he comes in with these dollars. He had just cashed his first major paycheck, right? He had worked 2 weeks, whatever it was, major paycheck. And his grandfather said, "Wow, that is very cool that you got a paycheck. What are you going to do with the money?" And he starts going through this list. And he said, "Yeah, but I thought you wanted to buy a boat so that you could create this goal for Bayou Tour, and that would be perhaps a living for you." And the boy's like, "Yeah, I want to do that, but right now I want to spend this money. I earned this money. I want to spend it." And the grandfather walked over to the mantle and picked up a picture of him and two other guys in the army. And he says, "Do you mind if I tell you the story of this, about this?" And of course, the grandson's like, "That's weird. We just got on one subject and now it's another," but it's a grandpa. So, they have these weird ways of doing things. Since I'm one, I know all about it. And he said, "Sure, fine." So the grandpa says, "It was me and my two good buddies, and we were out on a training exercise back when I was in the army." And he gave the names of the two other people. And he said, "Our Jeep broke down and we walked for miles, 4 miles. Thought it would not be smart to stay where we were. Our It was too far back to have GPS, and it didn't have any communication. And so let's get out of the Jeep and walk." So they start walking, and they're walking when they literally felt like they were so thirsty they literally could die within hours. That's the way they felt. And they came across a house and a windmill. Okay, so they went into the house. That was nice to have some shade for a few minutes. But they found at this house, they found a well with a pump. Hooked to the pump was a piece of paper that said, look under the porch of the house. There's a bottle of water there to prime this pump. And they were like, well, that's interesting. So they went, sure enough, they found the bottle of water, presumably the size of a wine bottle, and got that out. The grandfather, younger at that point, went and got the bottle of water out. And he goes, oh man, I'm so thirsty. And he pulls the cork and he was going to drink it. And the other guy, who happened to be a little wiser in that moment, says, wait, stop. And he says, what? I can get a drink. And he said, yeah, you could get a drink, I could get a drink, and our buddy could get a drink. But then we'll still be dead in a few hours. And so that put a sobering moment on what they were doing. And they decided to trust what the note said, poured the entire bottle of water into the top of the pump, which any of you younger people that don't know anything about priming a pump, you need to get a certain amount of liquid or whatever you're pumping into the pump to get the air out of it so that the liquid, in this case water, then doesn't have to be, it can be lifted by the water that's in the pipe, so to speak, instead of trying to lift it with air. In this case, the prior number of people knew that if you prime the pump, then it'll have plenty of possibility of getting plenty of water out of the ground. If you didn't, then perhaps no. So they had to take an act of faith. Talk about delayed gratification. If this doesn't work, we die. If it does work, we don't. But we don't know. We're taking the word of someone else. So they decided as a group to trust that that was the case, and it did work. And they had all the water they could have wanted. They basically bathed their upper bodies in it, sprinkled all over each other's heads, had all they could drink, fill their canteens, and survived to tell the story because they had plenty to drink. Talk about delayed gratification. It actually has in it moments of very important introspection and wisdom, the what ifs. And that's what delayed gratification always has. So if I look at this year and I think it's going to be a good year ultimately, but I have to go through some really hard times first, some difficult conversations, say some things, do some things, act in some ways, take on some responsibilities that I really don't want that much because I would rather have an easy life. I would rather have less hard things in my life. I would rather have comfort. That's human. That's human. And I'm just as human as anybody. But delayed gratification and understanding that the people around me who are important to me get further if I delay my gratification to be part of that team that gets further, part of that group, part of my company, and part of my family that gets further because I took the time to do things right, to have a little faith that it was going to work out and go a little bit slower. So that's what I had to say today. Can you see the correlation between starting in a small place and going to someplace great? So greatness from small beginnings is a phrase you can see on the shirt, Sic Parvis Magna, and that is, of course, the Latin term for greatness from small beginnings. And I believe that we are not put on this earth to be average, to be status quo. I believe that all of us were put on this earth to do something great. And what if we all did? What if we all did? Amazing how this world would be. That being said, I think I'm mostly done with the podcast today, talking about delayed gratification. So let me go back to the thing that I often read, most of the time read when I finish these. It's a quote from Zig Ziglar. You were designed for accomplishment, engineered for success, and endowed with the seeds of greatness. Let it be sowed in your life. You're endowed with the seeds of greatness. I believe that with all my heart. And I am going to continue to pray for the listeners of this so that there be a blessing out there and a vision and awareness and openness, an opening of your eyes to get to the greatness God's put you on this earth to be. Now, go be great.